now.
Okay, so we are live. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Dutra from the Brian Flynn team of Keller Williams Realty. And let's see, so we are streaming live. I'm just going to share this to my page real quick and we will get started. So let's see. Okay, here we are. All right, everybody. So I'd like to introduce my dream team. So we thought, both Liz and Andrew and I thought it would be awesome to get together and have a little conversation about some commonly asked questions that buyers and sellers have. So I'm here with Andrew Marquis from Guaranteed Rate and Liz Barletta from Legris. And we are going to talk to you guys about some commonly asked questions. So this should be fun because we run into a lot of, different questions, and I work with both Liz and Andrew very frequently, and we have an awesome relationship. And I find that working with people you know and trust not only helps the transaction go smooth, but it really helps the client, achieve the best results. So we're going to get right into it. Let me just make sure I've shared this here. And I'm going to ask the first question. So are you guys ready?
Ready.
Everyone ready?
Okay. Fire away.
All right. So my first question is going to be for Andrew, our lender. So Andrew, what a lot of my clients ask me, and a lot of buyers that I meet with, they're always asking, what do closing costs include and who pays for the closing costs?
Absolutely. So closing costs, I really talk about, Sarah, as settlement charges. So we have sort of two subsets that make up settlement charges. You have closing costs, which would be your lender, third-party fees, title fees, attorney fees. And then you would have your prepaid items, which is what you have to prepay to buy the house, like insurance for the home, property taxes, sometimes condo or HOA fees. Typically, the buyer is really responsible for those fees on a Massachusetts transaction. There are instances where a buyer's agent can negotiate a seller credit to cover some or all of those expenses. I know generally speaking, we're kind of in a seller's market, so that's not always the best approach or most competitive offer. I like to say that generally speaking, those fees are going to be in the range of 1.5% to 2% of the purchase price. So if, say, the purchase price is $500,000, those total settlement charges might be between $7,500 and $10,000 altogether.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And with that, I'm actually going to ask Miss Liz Barletta Esquire here a question.
Shoot.
So my question for Attorney Barletta is, in Massachusetts, can someone just work with a title company, or do they have to work with an attorney? And then they always ask me, like, do I have to get two attorneys? Is there someone that works with a bank? Do I get my own? They don't really understand any of that. So.
Absolutely. So that is literally the most common question I get. And one of the first things I do when I am introduced to a new buyer, just to kind of explain what it is that we do. And especially for people who are coming from other states where they've heard of title companies, like you mentioned, in Massachusetts, it's actually required to have an attorney conduct the closing for the lender. Other states, they just hire companies like a title company. Oftentimes those title companies are owned by attorneys, but in reality, you don't have to have a licensed attorney practitioner close in those other states. Massachusetts is particular in that sense. And I think it's for the benefit of the consumer at the end of the day, to make sure that, it is, in my opinion, the practice of law, and that's the state's opinion as well. So kind of talking about buyer versus bank, I know that I think probably maybe 20 years ago, I think a lot of families, maybe parents of home buyers nowadays, it wasn't common to have the same attorney represent both buyer and the bank. It was more customary for you as a home buyer to hire your own separate attorney that's separate and apart from the bank. But nowadays, that often is not the case. I would say 99% of the time when I'm hired to represent a buyer, I'm also going to be working with their bank. Firstly, because it's legally permissible. So our legislature has said that that is a permissible sort of dual representation because both the buyer and the bank's goals are in line. They both want title to be clear. They want to close on time, all those main goals. Of course, in the event of some kind of conflict between the buyer and the bank, then the attorney would have to recuse himself if that should arise. But that's so minimal. In my 11 years, it's never happened. So there is that potential for you to hire your own attorney to just represent you. And what that looks like is they'll be negotiating the purchase and sale agreement, tracking your important deadlines, explaining closing docs to you, and just being available to you as a sounding board. Whereas with the bank representation, we are researching the title. We're acting as escrow agent where all the funds flow through our account the day of closing, and those sorts of things. So again, the majority of the time we're representing both buyer and bank in those two roles. It is definitely permissible for you to hire your own attorney separate and apart from the banks, but you're just going to pay more. The majority of practitioners these days offer discounted fees to the consumer when they are representing both the bank as well as the buyer. So a lot of buyers, especially first-time home buyers, where every dollar counts, that's a really good deal to have someone as your advocate, but at a discounted fee because they're also getting compensated through some of the closing costs.
Nice.
I hope that answers the question.
No, that's definitely what I see most of the time, Liz. So that's awesome. Is that what you see too, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and again, this is why you have an attorney, because see, all that information, whereas like Liz is going to explain all those details to you about why that's important to have that representation. At the end of the day, when you have someone representing, you don't actually have to know every last little bit of what she just said.
Right.
You know that someone's representing you and taking care of all those details for you. So
absolutely.
I always joke around with my clients at the closing table. I am so glad I'm the realtor and not the attorney because there's a lot that goes into it. So that was helpful, Liz. Thank you.
Good. And actually, I think, Sarah, the next question should be for you, just kind of talking about the process of buying a home. Like, how do you start? How long does it take? If you can kind of talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Awesome. Great question. And for anyone who's just joining, I just want to say again, I'm Sarah. I'm a realtor out of Reading. And this is Andrew Marquis from Guaranteed Rate. He is a lender. And then we have Liz Barletta, who is an attorney. And both of these people I work with very frequently. I refer to them as my dream team. And, it just really makes the transaction go so smooth. So I'm super excited to be talking to you guys today and having a conversation with them. So if you just joined, Liz just asked me the question, how do you get started in the buying process and when does that all transpire? When do you need an agent? And the way that I would answer that honestly is, if you're thinking about buying a home or selling a home, you want to first understand your timeline, your motivation, and what your needs and wants are between you and whomever, you're going to be buying with. And then you want to get a realtor involved. And this realtor can help you understand all of those three things, right? The timeline, the motivation, and your wants and needs. So you really need to understand, okay, am I in a lease till then? What time? Am I in a lease till July? When do we want to be moved in? And kind of get a sense of what that is for yourselves. And then you want to meet with a realtor. And you can do this without a commitment. You can sit down with one realtor, two realtors, three realtors, and determine who the best fit is for you. And that realtor is going to be able to guide you through all of those things, the timeline, the motivation, understanding your wants and needs. So I'd say as soon as it starts to enter your mind that this might be a good idea, you definitely want to have a conversation with a realtor. It's comes at no cost to you. And all it does is help you prepare for your future. So, it's really important that you understand what's happening in front of you. So very, very easy to just sit down, have a Zoom call just like this, a consultation, and understand, what's in front of you. So that's what I would say, how you would get started. Definitely reach out to a realtor, make sure you find the one.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people, they think, oh, maybe this is a year away. That's too early to talk to an agent, but it really isn't. It can really set you up for success if you do, right?
Correct. Exactly. Because it can take anywhere, and this is probably jumping into another question, but it can take anywhere from 2 weeks to, several months to actually locate a home and get your offer accepted. So understanding the market, understanding your timeline, it's never too early to do that, because there's no commitment. It's like getting prepared. You wouldn't go, grocery shopping without a list, or, understanding what your budget is. You have to understand these things before you get started. Otherwise your results it won't be an effective and enjoyable process.
I do want to say one quick thing about Sarah. So, we're out there working, and we do work with a lot of real estate agents. I know that Attorney Barletta does as well. And the vast majority of real estate agents, Sarah, might not even do it full time. They might kind of do it on the side, but they happen to have a license. And, Sarah is a full-time professional, that does this each and every day. I don't want to boast about your numbers, Sarah, but I want to say last year you might have sold like 40 houses, some incredible amount. And so if you think about it this way, Sarah's selling almost a house every single week, which for a real estate agent, that's a lot. And so she's really devoted to finding you the right fit. This is what she spends all her time doing. And in my experience, she's competing with, she's working with a lot of buyers. It's a very difficult market to win as buyers. I got a call yesterday from an agent that said they had 28 offers on a house, right? So it's very challenging. And Sarah comes out on top the vast majority of the time. So, and that's not normal. So I just want to put that plug in for you.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate
It's true.
that.
It's true. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay, so I will jump into the next question. This question is going to be for Liz. So you answered this just a little bit before, but typically when someone hires you for their representation, what do those services include when it comes to a purchase? If someone's purchasing a home and they say, okay, we need an attorney, what do those services include, and when do you get involved?
Yeah. So the majority of the time, we usually don't get involved until the offer's been accepted. It just happens to be that way. I always encourage, if you want to kind of have all your ducks in a row, maybe have your team already identified even before you go out shopping. It just gives sometimes a sense to the buyer of being a little bit more like, as many buyers will soon realize, hopefully when you get out there, is that once an offer is accepted, a lot of things start to happen. And being able to have your team already solidified is always a great first step, which I love. And also, if there's any kind of quirky, weird things that need to be added to an offer, I'm always happy to review those too. And having, being involved before the offer provides that ability. But the majority of the time it is after the offer has been accepted. And what's included in services for buyer representation is essentially the negotiation of the purchase and sale agreement. So a lot of people have maybe seen offers, and they're sort of standardized forms. They're, for the most part, Massachusetts has 2 different standard forms. And essentially it's a fill in the blank form. 2 pages, maybe 3 pages, but it's limited. Whereas a purchase and sale agreement, it goes from this 2-page document to like a 15 or 20-page document after the attorneys get involved. So obviously, super important to have your own attorney, because the responsibility of drafting the initial version lays with the seller's attorney. So as you can imagine, if you know that an attorney is representing a seller and they're the one who are preparing it, they're obviously doing it with a seller skew, with all the benefits to the seller and not you, the buyer, because you're not their client. So it's important to have your own advocate go in, make changes, add different clauses, strike certain clauses that maybe the seller attorney has added, and get to a point where the draft is, for the most part, more fair and reasonable for both sides. So once we have that purchase and sale agreement ready to go, depending on if you're buying a condo or single family or multifamily, If you're buying a condo, we will also review your condominium documents. So those are basically the docs that say, you know, what the rules and responsibilities of the association are, of the unit owners, if there's restrictions on renting the property in the future, pets, which is a huge one. We review those and talk through that with the client so they understand sort of what they're getting into with the association. And then once that's done, you'll sign that document, you deliver your second deposit, which is sort of the larger amount that you're putting down with the home. And then the next part of our job is kind of just observing, making sure everything's going well, checking in with, you know, Andrew's team, making sure everything's going well with the loan. If we need to, you know, provide any kind of documentation, we do that. And then we track your mortgage commitment deadline. And Andrew may talk about this in a little bit, but it's basically the day that Andrew's team will commit to you and say, you are approved for your loan, maybe except for these conditions that were still outstanding. So it's our job as your attorney to look at that condition list and say, okay, one of the conditions is that we need something from the IRS. I don't trust the IRS. I don't know when the IRS is going to get me that document. So I'm probably going to err on the side of caution and extend that deadline for the buyer, because that deadline, again, is super important. The moment that passes, your deposit could potentially be at risk. So that's why, again, these are things that are super detailed where you buyers don't necessarily need to know all this, but just know that that's what we're doing. We are taking that active interest in making sure that all ducks are in a row. And then
I think that's important, Liz, just to interject for a quick second.
Sure.
I've had a lot of clients say, I mean, I've been in situations where sellers don't have an attorney, or buyers or sellers may say, well, why do I need an attorney? Or do I have to pay for an attorney? I'll just represent myself, you know, and I'm saying, oh my goodness, you know, and you're buying usually at least $500,000+ house, spend the extra money and get an attorney. I mean, it's worth it to have someone on your side and to have that extra layer of protection. And, you know, so I get a lot of buyers that ask that, will say, oh, or sellers even, you know, say, oh, do I need an attorney? And look at all of the things that they're doing. And I can tell you that the buyer and the seller won't not be doing these things on their own.
Well, and even attorneys that are not specialized in real estate, you know, there are plenty of attorneys out there that are super smart and capable attorneys, but they just don't do this every day. And so they potentially will presume that if a commitment letter comes over from a bank, that means that the loan is 100% good to go. And that's not necessarily the case. So they may not even look at the commitment letter. So sometimes that sort of family friend who's doing you a favor isn't really doing you any favors. But kind of talking, since we were sort of ended with the mortgage part, Andrew, I think a lot of people sort of don't necessarily know how to get started, what the real process is to engage with you. If you could kind of talk about what a buyer needs to do to get started with a pre-approval or a pre-qualification.
Absolutely, yeah. So really a lot of good information on the call. So really where we start off in the process, I know Sarah spoke a little bit about the timeline and how she kind of assesses needs. And really from my perspective, what I assess is what is the client financially able to perform. So really where we start off is you could either call or email me, or you could submit an application through my website, you know, however you're most comfortable to get started. You know, I know many a times Sarah will send an email to the client and I introducing us. That's usually at the very beginning of the process. And I know Attorney Barletta had said earlier, like, hey, you know, do you want to get pre-approved the night before making an offer? Probably not. Do a lot of people do that? Absolutely. So it's really great, you know, if we have that conversation, you know, even a year in advance, you know, and I might end up saying at the end of the call, let's not do your pre-approval for 6 months. Or they might say, you know what, I don't know how great my credit is. Well, let's check it now. Because even if you're not buying for 6 months, I can put you in a better position to get the best rates when the time comes. So really, you know, we're talking a little bit about it. If you do decide to proceed with the pre-approval, we're checking your credit, talking about your income, verifying your income and down payment. You know, sometimes people get gift funds for down payment. Sometimes they borrow against retirement. So we really go through that. And we talk about what's the most you can spend. You know, I had a client yesterday where they qualified to buy a $2 million house. They submitted the application for $700,000. So there was this huge gap between what they qualified for and what they thought they wanted to spend. Now, ultimately, I think at the end of the call, what they were most comfortable with was going to be between 900 and $1 million in terms of like what they wanted to spend monthly. The other thing I want to really discourage is going to Zillow or Redfin and calculating payments and looking at things like that, because the mortgage insurance isn't right. The homeowner's insurance is almost never right. The taxes are sometimes right. But you're going to be looking at payments saying, oh, I can or cannot afford this property based on inaccurate assumptions. So the sooner, you can chat with Sarah, get the process started, have a conversation with myself. We're going to get you, someone once said, not talking to a mortgage professional and going out there looking at houses is like going to the shoe store without knowing your size. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's really how I would get started with it. And I think really what I want to bounce my next question to is going to go right back at Sarah here. Sarah talked a lot about what she's doing with you as a client to talk about your needs and location and, all these, like, it seems like a lot of work, Sarah. And I know you're driving around looking at houses with people and going in open house. I mean, it's just a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was curious is, like, if I want to work with you, I heard like online that I have to pay you like 2.5%. So does that mean like if I want to buy a house for 500,000 that I just write you a check for 12,000? Is that how it works?
Sure, you can. No, that's a great question. And, and that's something I always discuss when I sit down with a buyer and have a consultation, which is always, the one of the most important first steps. No, so working with a buyer's agent my fee will always come from the seller's agent. Okay. You have two agents. You have an agent that represents the seller and you have an agent that represents the buyer. Typically, that's how it's done. And my fee typically comes from the seller's side. So when I work with a buyer, essentially the cost to work with me, you're working with me for no cost, potentially, right? So, where sometimes there are situations where a buyer's agent may collect a fee from a buyer's, but it's not necessary. Most of the time, you can collect your fee directly from the seller. And that relationship, again, you're working with a buyer. So a buyer's agent's working with a buyer, seller's agent's working with the seller. And in that relationship, it's my fiduciary responsibility to protect those clients' needs. So, we're doing a lot of work essentially, and, our fee comes at the closing. So there's no upfront fee. A lot of buyers don't understand that, and that, to be honest, sometimes that's why buyers, I think, shy away from getting the process started, is because they don't understand a lot of what we're here to educate you on.
So Sarah, just to kind of clarify this for anyone tuning in. So if I say to you, I want to buy a house for 500,000, more than likely, you and I are working together. I might be signing an agreement to work with you, for your time and all that. But then ultimately the way that you're likely to be compensated is from the seller. So like when the seller sells their home at the closing, you're going to get some money from the seller, but it's not like I have to pay you that 12 grand at closing. It's actually coming from the sales proceeds of that home from the seller.
Exactly.
So there's really no reason not to engage you as a buyer's agent.
Correct. Exactly. Having a buyer's agent is, I talk to so many buyers and they're, out looking at homes, requesting homes online. I want to see this one, that one. And there's always this, sometimes I get a little sense of resistance from working with a buyer's agent. And, and I always kind of, inside, I always kind of laugh a little, because I say, once I meet with a buyer and we sit down and I explain the process, it's like they're so shocked and surprised at what this looks like. And the biggest thing that I feel is that people fear what they don't understand. So if someone doesn't understand something, that's why all the fear is there. But once you allow someone to guide you through the process, it's easy. It's easy, it's fun, it's enjoyable when we get it done. And, and just to wrap that up a little bit, the benefit of having people, you hear the term a lot in our business and in all of these industries, who you work with matters. And you hear it a lot, but there's a strong truth in that, because when you work with someone that has your best interest at heart, you have all these components of the transaction. You have a lender that cares about your needs, a lender that's available for you 24/7. You have an attorney that cares about your needs that's available for you, and everyone's working in your best interest. You just have to determine your wants and needs and show up at the showing. It's very, very easy. And, so I just think the most important part of, if you're getting anything from this, it's just to understand that, get yourself prepared and work with people that really have your best interest in heart and know how to navigate this market. So that's a great question, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's see. Let's see what I can find here, because that we have a bunch of questions that will sort of lead from that one. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to you for a second, Andrew. Can you touch on credit when it comes to purchasing a home? Can you buy with essentially poor credit?
Yeah, so it, poor is a relative term, right? So some people have a 720, which is, generally an excellent, they call it poor, and then other people have a poor score and they think it's good. So let's put some definition on credit scores. So generally credit scores run anywhere from like around 350 to 840, is generally what we see. Now, anything from our perspective as a lender, when you're really in like 740 plus range, you're excellent. Okay, I would say like A to A plus, depending. If your score is between say 7 and 740, that would be like very good. Now, as a first-time home buyer, if you're 680 plus and you are a first-time home buyer, you meet certain qualifications, then you would be eligible for a mass housing loan, which has really attractive terms. So I would say, like, if you could really be above 680, that's probably ideal. Now, prior to COVID, we lend down to 580 on a credit score. Right now, we're at 600. So we did go all the way down to 6. The minimum credit score for that's probably ideal. Now, prior to COVID, we lend down to 580 on a credit score. Got a little bit of an echo going on here. Sorry. So what I was going to say is conventional lending will lend down to a 620 score, and then FHA will go down to 600. So really you want to see those scores at least in the 600s, and it goes along with, again, what Liz and Sarah were saying earlier. If we talk to a client and they're not buying for a year and they're at 580, I can provide a couple simple suggestions to get them over that credit score hurdle, like in a matter of a couple of months. So generally we want to approach this proactively.
And Andrew, can you maybe clarify also, like so I think a lot of home buyers, they get nowadays with their credit card statement, a credit score that's listed there, and they may think that that's their credit. Is that the credit score that you would go off of?
That's a great one. So yeah, that's probably my most common one, Liz. I sounded like you got a most common one earlier. Every client now has access. I shouldn't say every, but majority of clients out there have access to either like a Credit Karma, or they get a credit score through one of their credit cards or Bank of America. That's what's called a consumer indicator score. So it gives you an indication of how your credit might be. And although they pose those scores sort of to match our scores, like you could have a 700 score there, it's not a direct correlation. So like, if it says your credit's excellent on that program, then more than likely when we pull it, it's going to be excellent. But if it says your score is 720, I might pull it and it might be 680, it might be 740. It's just not the same thing. So what also happens is you get the FICO indicator score. It says you're at 740. I pull it and I'm at 710. And the customer thinks, oh, my score went down 30 points because you pulled my credit. And I'm trying to say, no, our credit score, you would have been 710 before I pulled it. And, the other thing about having a credit check, because that's another one, is having an isolated one-time inquiry for a pre-approval is not going to affect your score. You can actually have up to 4 mortgage companies pull it. It's regarded as shopping, and it doesn't affect your score. What you don't want to do is have like 6 different companies. You got a mortgage inquiry, a car loan, you're getting 0% at Jordan's, and all this other stuff all at once is kind of high risk, and that's where your score could get lowered a little bit. But no, that's a great question, Liz.
Yeah, that's a good one. Buyers misunderstand that all the time.
Yep. And I
Especially
don't
now
know.
that it's available, because it used to not be, and so people wouldn't think about it. But now that it has, it's become more of a common question.
Yeah. And I think, like, it's funny. I feel like I keep asking everyone what their services cost. It's just good information. And what I want to actually ask you, Liz, is like, I do a lot of loans for some of these attorneys at the firms downtown, and they charge upwards of like $500 an hour, or it could be $800 an hour, these crazy rates. And so how does your fee structure work as a real estate attorney?
Great question. So it's actually interesting. I represented a buyer who was not a first-time home buyer. They actually purchased with a family friend attorney the first time around. And this is like one of those horror stories, right? They thought they were getting a deal. And then after closing, all of a sudden they get a bill for like $5,000 for their family friend attorney's hourly fee. Which is insane. So the majority of those practitioners that actually focus on real estate solely are likely going to charge you on a flat fee basis. So you're going to know exactly what it is that we're going to cost before you close on your home, or at least with us, because we tell you what it is before. Sometimes, unfortunately, attorneys don't always pick up the phone and talk to the clients beforehand, so then maybe it's a surprise. But all of our clients are always aware, because that's one of the first things we want them to be informed. Knowledge is power, like I think we've been talking about, and having knowing what to expect before the closing is huge. So you're not going to have to pay in advance of closing. So if, God forbid, you got an offer accepted and then that deal falls apart because of the inspection, even if we've spoken, even if I've already started working on the purchase and sale agreement, I'm not going to send you a bill for that work, because I assume that the next house that you find, you're going to come back to us. And then we just get paid at the closing. So when we tell you at the closing, or hopefully the day before closing, when we have our closing package finalized and the numbers finalized, when we send you that final figure that you need to use for your certified check or wire transfer, that's going to include everything, including our fee.
So just to clarify, Liz, so earlier we talked a little bit about closing costs being like maybe for a $500,000 home being around $5,000 for the actual costs. So for the most part, your fees would be part of that, or would it be in addition to that? It might be part of that, right?
So the majority of the time it's part of that. Depending on who you were working with for your lender, they don't always talk to the attorneys beforehand and include their fees in the quotes. So sometimes it may be a little off. So just ask your lender when you get your fee quote, does this have both what's called the settlement fee, which is the closing fee that the bank, that for our role as the bank attorney and researching title and all of that, as in addition to any buyer representation fees for that role as the buyer attorney, if any. Just make sure when you do get that estimate to see if it was included in it. But yeah, so generally it is.
Great.
And actually, wanting to kind of pivot to the market today, Sarah, we've all experienced, COVID. I think at the very beginning of it, we were all like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? And it actually just made this whole industry hotter. So it's super competitive out there. And I think one of the questions that a lot of home buyers are, they hear, like what Andrea mentioned before, like 20 offers, 30 offers. How do you make offers competitive in this kind of market for your home buyers?
Yeah, that's a great question. You write them with me. No.
Yes, exactly.
No, I mean, honestly, like I said before, whether it's me or someone else, find an agent that is the one for you. That is the most important thing. And you establish that by meeting with an agent, right? So one of the things that I talk about with my buyers when I'm meeting with them and I have a consultation, and a lot of agents don't do these consultations, I've found, when I meet with them. And it's important because this is what I discuss. I discuss the market conditions and how we can make our offer competitive. And there are lots of ways, okay? Price is not the only thing. There are terms in the offer other than price that we strengthen. But the bottom line is, to make your offer the most competitive, you have to have the best terms for the seller. There's no pretty way to say it. That's the truth. That's the market we're in. 2 weeks before Christmas, one of my colleagues got 25 offers on a listing. 2 weeks before Christmas. 25 offers on a listing. So I always prep buyers for the reality. I will never push a buyer to do something they're uncomfortable doing. You have to understand your comfort. But if you want to make your offer competitive, it has to have strong terms that are most appealing to the seller. And there are lots of ways we can do this. We can get creative. There's escalation clauses. There's waived contingencies. There's waived inspections. You can do inspection before you make an offer. There's sometimes opportunity for that. So there's lots of different ways. Another I know we're sort of, saying this frequently here, but it's the truth. Another way that a lot of my offers have been accepted is having a lender and an attorney that are not only recognized and reputable in the marketplace. Other realtors know my team members and they get the pre-approval and they see Andrew's name on it and there's a sigh of relief. I just closed a deal in Reading, actually, and the listing agent who represents the seller was familiar with Andrew, worked together before, understand that he works at a high level and gets the job done. And she was relieved to tell her sellers that these buyers that Sarah's representing have a loan officer I'm familiar with, and we beat out 10 other offers on that property. So, there's lots of different ways you can represent yourself, not only as a realtor, but represent your buyers in a really, really, really bright light. And, and one of the ways that I love to do this is I like to develop a relationship with the listing agent, beforehand. I like to call them directly, let them know who I am, a little bit about my buyers, where they are in the marketplace. Like if I have buyers that are second-time home buyers, been looking at properties for a while, I'm letting the agent know this, because then he or she understands, okay, these buyers are committed to the property. I want to convey to the seller's agent the strengths of my clients. And that's my job to do that with, of course, respecting their comfort and respecting, what they want. But yeah, there's lots of different ways that you can get very creative in, the most important thing is understanding the market and just not giving up. You don't give up, you keep going to you'll find something.
And one of the things that I think you're also that you're not mentioning, but I'll mention for you, is that your reputation. So a lot of the times it has to do a lot with the reputation of the agent that's presenting the offer, and maybe the people who are receiving it, knowing that you prepare your clients and all those things too. So yeah, it's a team effort for sure.
It is. It's really, I know we're honing down on that, but it's so important in this market because it's just more competitive. I mean, I've been in the industry since 2009 and I've only seen it, kind of go rise, but it's every year it's just getting stronger and stronger. And you have to work with someone that's innovative, creative, and is talking to you about all of these things. So super, super important. Okay, so let's see here. There's so many things that we can just jump right into, but let me ask you this, Andrew, because this actually goes along a little bit with timeline. How long does the actual loan process take?
Yeah, so we do the pre-approval that I know we talked about that earlier in the process, Sarah. And when we do that pre-approval, we do try to collect as much of the documentation up front from the client as we can. The nice thing about our process that I do like to include is a lot of it can be done remotely. So they can upload their documents, they can DocuSign most of their paperwork. I still have clients that say, hey, can we meet with you? And, we do meet, but that's probably the vast minority. So it can be done very easily that way. So once we issue that pre-approval, the client's out in the market, Sarah's showing them some properties, we're working, maybe adjusting your pre-approval letter. and then your offer gets accepted. Okay. And now it's, everything gets real. The rubber hits the road, so to speak. And so then I'm going to speak with the client about terms. Hey, what kind of rates are available? Mortgage rates change day to day. What kind of programs are most beneficial for you? And then really what to expect in this process. Now, at that point, it's really a matter of we're going to formalize the loan application. The client's going to e-sign it. That's an easy process. Takes us a day or two to email it out. Client reviews it, DocuSign. We also include a list of any remaining documents that are still outstanding. Maybe we did the pre-approval 3 months ago, so we need new pay stubs and bank statements. Mm-hmm. They submit all that documentation. We submit the loan to our underwriter. We're generally approved within a week, okay? And that's underwriters reviewed it. But then what we're really waiting on is mainly third-party items. So we're waiting on the appraisal. The appraisal, depending, sometimes if there's bigger down payments, we don't even do an appraisal right now. A lot of the appraisals we do is either a desktop or a drive-by. I still do get appraisals where the agent wants them in the house because it's been completely redone and they really want to recognize all the work that's been done on the interior. But that appraisal sometimes can take between, I would say, around 2 weeks. Okay, if it's a desktop, it could be less than that. If it's a full interior, exterior, it might be 2.5 weeks, but around 2 weeks. So I would say long and short of it is we get all the documents, e-sign the app, get the appraisal done. We should be fully approved in about 3 weeks, okay? During that time, Liz's team is researching the title, making sure any kind of title issues are resolved, sending us a title commitment, so that we have that for our file. We know that we're going to be lending in first position, that we're going to be insured. But I would say generally to think about 3 weeks is a safe assumption. When people talk about the process of like purchasing a home, I mean, as you know, Sarah, it could be 30 days, it could be 6 months. Sure. Average is probably 45 days. The quicker could be 3 to 4 weeks. But we do see longer closings for sure, Yep. That answer your question?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Just a kind of a little tidbit for people who are listening to this, because you just brought it up and I thought it was, I just thought of it to mention. Although in the contract, it could say 30, 45 days or so, in the event that there is a title issue, which is one of the things that we do in the background, that could potentially postpone your closing. So if we discover something that maybe it was a tax lien from the seller and they're still fighting with the city about it, that could potentially, if not resolved by the closing date that's listed in your offer, it could push the closing. So one of the things that I always talk about in my sort of intro call is, what's your backup plan in the event that closing doesn't happen on the closing day? Did you already give notice to your landlord? Hopefully not. Did you have family that you can stay with? If you're selling and buying, do you have some wiggle room there? Because, just once, even when the purchase and sale agreement is signed, it's not 100% that we're going to be closing on that day if something like that were to pop up. So just to throw that little tidbit in there.
Great advice. And I had a question actually for you, Liz. Okay. Yeah. So, and I'm losing my train of thought. You got me thinking about all sorts of stuff. So let me try to regain this one. Oh, okay. So I don't want to really harp on the pandemic and everything going on right now, but it is a relevant topic. And, hopefully this is the year that we break free of this, until the next, right? But I think like a ton of my clients, when they come to me up front, whether they be refinancing or purchasing, they'll ask me, do I have to meet with you to go through the loan? Like I said, and there's a vast minority that still want to meet with me, but the vast majority is like, hey, if I can do this remotely, that's fantastic. Yeah. Like I said, usually we can get around the appraisal where we can either waive an appraisal or just do it remotely. But they always want to know like how, and I say, well, we do a flash close at guaranteed rate where clients can e-sign. Yeah, e-sign, maybe it's like 60% of the closing documents can be electronically signed. So it limits the amount of wet signatures or in live person signatures that Liz's team is going to require on the closing day. But there is still like, Massachusetts requires that like Liz meet with the client somehow and notarize things. And, so I'm really curious, like what's the latest way of handling that?
Yeah, so great question. We were really, really hopeful that at the beginning of COVID, the legislature in Massachusetts would permit what a lot of other states have, which are basically digitally notarized closings, where you go into like a Zoom room, the person's there explaining to you the documents, and you digitally sign them. Unfortunately, they did pass a bill that was temporary. It was not helpful very much because it still required wet signatures and multiple videos. It was just not, it was too labor intensive and inconvenient for it to be helpful. So unfortunately, we still, I mean, fortunately and unfortunately, you get to see your clients, which is nice, but unfortunately, you know, it does expose everybody potentially. We do require that you come to closing. That will be, for the most part, the only time that we interact with you in person. Unfortunately, again, to try and limit exposure, before, Sarah knows, closings used to be a party. We would, you know, chit chat, hugs and kisses. The agent would be there. Sometimes, you know, Andrew could be there if he could. Like, it was a party. Now, nobody unless signers can come. So if you have family members, support people, even if they're like your spouse, but they're not on part of the deed, they can't even come into the room. Every firm is doing it differently. I've heard that there are some firms that are not even letting you in the office, that you are closing everything on top of the hood of your car. So at least our office is permitting people to come in, but it's very, you know, the attorney's here, the client's over there. We're passing the paper along through the table. Thankfully, with loans of Andrew's that use the flash close option, instead of it being an hour, it's 20 or so minutes, because it's just sort of the recordable documents and a couple other things that have to be signed. But yes, we still have to meet in person at the closing. Another little wrinkle that I always tell clients too, so they don't get too upset, it's all about expectation setting, is because we are in this pandemic, all the registries are closed to the public. So before, if you were buying in Salem, Massachusetts, we would close in Salem Registry of Deeds. Now we can't do that. And so all the closings are happening in our office, which is not necessarily always convenient for everybody, but I always feel like buyers should take the day off to close anyway. So it shouldn't be too much of an inconvenience, but it's just one of those, you know, little things that before we used to try and accommodate everybody's schedule, everybody's preference of where they want to close. We just can't do that now. And we probably won't. I feel like most law firms are going to continue that. I don't know if in the foreseeable future, the registries are ever going to open them back up to the public. I don't think it actually serves too much of a you know, benefit besides scheduling and things like that. But I think the risk potentially could outweigh that sort of preference of consumers' convenience. Thank you. So I hope I answered your question. Things
great.
definitely have
That's
changed,
great.
but also stay the same.
But I mean, you said earlier, the market's, you know, basically white hot, right? And yet, you know, we're still getting all these closings. And, you know, I think, you know, it's interesting because, like, you know, certain goods you'll buy online, you'll go to purchase something, and, you know, it takes like a year to get, like, you know, certain items, you know, but yet we're still getting, you know, people in homes, and, you know, and I think the value of residential real estate, like Sarah touted earlier, has really just gone up. You know, people want their own space, and they want their own, you know, domicile, and it's interesting. So
yeah. And actually, Andrew, I have a question for you that I think is still, you know, no matter how many times I feel like all of us talk about this to the public, it's still a common misconception that you have to have 20% down to get a loan and to buy a home.
You do now. No, I'm only kidding.
Yeah,
no, it changed this morning, Liz. No, it changed today. No, no, I mean, you know, and I don't want to overcomplicate this, but I'll say this. There are loan programs where you can buy with as little as $0 down. Okay. There's veteran loans, there's mass housing down payment assistance. And then there's a lot of other loan programs that allow you to buy with 3 to 3.5% down, and then a lot that go with 5% down. Clients always, I think a lot of clients, and some of the ones Sarah and I have actually worked with, they happen to be, you know, big time savers and very financially sort of conservative. And I think, you know, they kind of go back to the prior generations, Liz, of like, hey, don't buy a house until you have your 20%.
Right.
And I think the key thing here that I want everyone to understand is that we're about 13 years past the financial crisis, you know, a mortgage crisis of 2008. The real estate markets have been pretty darn stable since then. And so the cost of PMI, which is a mortgage insurance premium a buyer pays monthly when they put less than 20% down, is very, very low because the risk level is low. So like when we were talking earlier about Zillow and Redfin being inaccurate sources for monthly payments, you know, we a lot of times will do PMI loans where the borrower is paying $40 a month for PMI or $50 a month for PMI when Zillow said it was $450. So the idea of, you know, borrowing at 2.5% right now, which is the lowest 30-year fixed rate of all time, getting a PMI of $40, in my opinion, that's going to far outweigh waiting 3 more years to have 20% when maybe the rates are now 3.5% or 4% and the prices have gone up another 20%. So, you know, there's really some awesome options with less than 20% down. And I'd ask you to be open-minded to it if you're not already, and just have that conversation with a professional, you know, like Sarah keeps mentioning over and over. With that, you're on the hot seat, Sarah. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So, you know, I guess my real question here, and this is a little bit more of a complicated one, but it kind of goes back to what Liz is saying. When you're working with you know, let's say sellers actually that are looking to sell and buy a home at the same time, you know, how do we work that out? Like, are there different options? Like, how can we do that? You know?
That's my favorite. That's my favorite. Well, because, right. And that's a great question, Andrew, because a lot of buyers and sellers in this market, someone who's selling has to go somewhere, right? You know, they have to either buy another home. Very rarely are they, you know, moving out of home ownership into, you know, a rental or some, you know, staying with someone. So they're also going to have to buy. So how do we tackle this? Well, I have a beautiful document I've made on that, which I discuss with all my buyers on at a consultation. And there's a couple different options, and Liz is involved in one of these a little bit. So one of the options is a rent back or a lease back or a use and occupancy. It's sort of, and maybe Liz, you can clarify, I guess, if those terms are interchangeable, but I believe they are. And what that allows the seller to do is if a seller is putting their home on the market, also has to buy, but needs the funds from that property to purchase another home, it allows, if the buyer is willing to do one of these options, it allows the seller to remain in the property for an agreeable market rent. And they have their funds now, because now the closing has happened as a typical closing, 30, 45 days. The seller gets their funds. Now they can start purchasing and looking for a home without having a home sale contingency, because this becomes very difficult in this market. So you can use that option to alleviate a home sale contingency, to give the seller some comfort in knowing, okay, I have time to figure out somewhere to go, because this is a seller's market. Sellers have some leverage here. So a lot of buyers are coming from a rental and they have flexibility, so they can offer this to the seller. As Liz mentioned, as I discuss with my buyers when I meet them, is different options, this being one of them. Do you have a place to go? If I'm meeting with a seller, do you have a place to go? Do you have a home sale contingency? Could you stay somewhere in between? I just met with a seller about 2 weeks ago. They have a vacation home. So they're going to stay in their vacation home for a very short period of time till they find another property. So there's a lot of different options. And the last thing I'll say about this is, because it's such a strong seller's market right now, I usually say to my sellers, once I get you that strong offer, you know, and once you understand what your proceeds are going to be, you really don't care where the heck you're going to stay for a little while in between, because you've just really made out on your end of the process. So you've gotten, you know, a high value for your home. So now you're able to, you know, sit with a little discomfort knowing that, you know, you profited on that side. So it usually alleviates the seller's fear a little bit when they understand you know, what a great offer I'm going to get them. So that usually, you know, comforts them a little bit. Okay, we'll stay at I've had, you know what, if we can get that price, I'll stay at a hotel for a few weeks if I have to. So there's lots of different options. And again, we discuss them beforehand, so you know what to expect.
That's great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just saying that, like
Fine.
how you ended that comment, I think that is whenever somebody comes to me who hasn't used our team in the past, and they've had maybe a bad experience with other people, I always ask why, and they're like, oh, well, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, and it's all about expectation setting. If you know that these are the two potential options, and you know one doesn't work out, but the other was already told to you as a possibility, it's going to sting less, and it's not going to it's not going to sour the experience. So that's, again, the importance of working with people who actually will walk you through the whole process, to just make it the most positive as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Okay, do we have time for one more? Or are we going to wrap
Maybe
it
one
up?
more. Maybe
Okay, one
more.
more quick one. Let's see. Let's see, what do I have? I think, well, geez, I think we went through most of them here that I had on my agenda. I don't know, Liz, do you want to just talk just real briefly about how maybe people can get in touch with you, and then Andrew, you can let people know how people can get in touch with you if they'd like to start a conversation?
Absolutely. So if you have watched this video, have any other questions for me particularly, you can always email my team at barlettateam@ligris.com. You can also call me at 617-304-3404. And again, if there's any questions, even if you've already started the process and you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You know, we are always, you know, giving up our time to educate, because that's what we're passionate about. So no time to me is wasted, and I'm happy to answer any questions viewers have directly.
Awesome.
Great. All right. And no, I want to thank both you ladies for your time today. It was fantastic. And I was going to say you can reach me directly through Sarah. She has my info. But the easiest way to reach me, I'll just give you one option. You can email me. It's just andrew@rate.com. It's really that easy. And if you send me an email, we can set up a call, or you can email me a question. But would love to help out in any way I can. So thanks for tuning in.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Liz. Thank you guys both for giving everyone such helpful information. And, you know, if anyone needs to get a hold of me, my number is 781-866-9562. Call, text, email. I think it's safe to say that we all really love what we do. So we make ourselves available for our clients and for anyone that has questions. So never hesitate to reach out, and I can certainly put you in touch with my absolute favorite lender and attorney. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.